Okay. Welcome, everybody. I suggest we start. There are people still coming in the session, but welcome, everyone, to the 2022 Northern Hemisphere Summer Hack and Learn, here hosted by the Go Lab in collaboration with Impropon from São Paulo in Brazil. Before I get started, I want to point out that the session is being recorded and it will be made available online as soon as possible at the end of the session today. So welcome everybody. Thank you to Impropon to co-host this event with us again. My name is Mara Eroldi. I am the academic director at the Government Outcome Lab here at the University of Oxford. And we have been hosting this Hack and Learn for a number of years now for data enthusiasts that want to use data to create better outcomes. In the call today, there are people who participated and champions of the challenges. We also have James and Lima, I think, who, if you were on Slack, were on the background trying to help us with technicalities. There is Juliana, to whom I will pass the word shortly, who is our senior data steward here in Oxford, and we have Georgie, the data steward of our collaborative in Impropon, Brazil, and Sri, who was managing the Hack and Learn dutifully and keeping us on task, remembering us what to do, as well as two people who will give comments to our results or output from the Hack and Learn. For those of you for whom this is the first Hack and Learn, at the show and tell session, we present what we have done in the past 2 weeks, and we have feedback by some experts. Today we have Carolina Melo, who is a researcher at Impropon. You want to say hello, Carolina? Carolina, thank you for joining. I know you have a flu, and but you care so much about the work we are doing that you're joining us with fever and sneezing and coughing. Thank you. You want to say hello so people attach name to face?
Hi, everyone. So as Mara said, I'm Carolina. I am a researcher at Matrices and a professor at Impropon, and I'm very glad to be here again in this challenge with you guys and super excited to learn about the work you did.
Thank you, Carolina. And we have Milena Castelnou, I never know how to pronounce your surname properly, Milena, from the Education Outcome Fund. Do you want to say hello to people who don't know you yet?
Sure, thank you, Mara, and thank you so much for inviting me to this session. So I'm Milena Castelnou, I'm Chief Programs Officer at the Education Outcomes Fund. So we are a large-scale outcomes fund hosted at UNICEF, at the United Nations, and we oversee large-scale programs in education. Could say more, but I don't think that's the purpose. So yeah, very much looking forward to hearing what you came up with.
Thank you. So I'll stop here in terms of pointing people out. Please put your name and surname on your Zoom profile so that we know who you are. The agenda for today is, as I said, we did the welcome and introduction. We will do the summary. We will look at what has been achieved and feedback from our two experts before opening up to Q&A from everybody. But feel free to post questions and suggestions in the chat as we go along. It's a very informal session. What we like about this Hack and Learn is how friendly and informal it is. So let's keep it that way. And after the session, but I will remind you at the end, we have a half an hour social event just to stay together and chat beyond the Hack and Learn. I'll stop here and I'll ask Juliana to remind us what happened in the past 2 weeks.
Great, thank you, Mara. I want to say this for the people who are coming here for the first time. Maybe it's the first Hack and Learn or the first time that they are joining a show and tell session. Our Hack and Learn has 3 or maybe 4 phases. We started our Hack and Learn with the kickoff session. This time the kickoff session was on the 7th of September, and it was just before our social outcomes conference, so it was big momentum. And then we formed some groups and we used Slack to keep communicating with the groups and to address a particular challenge with people from all over the world. We spent 2 weeks doing that work, and now we are having a show and tell session. The idea of this session is that all the groups are coming here together, and we want to show each other what we did, what are the outputs of our work, and what are the prototypes or the questions that we have been working on. The idea is that we should capture our lessons and learnings from this 2-week work. And the idea is that after this session, we should all come together and try to write a blog or try to write a meaningful piece. So we capture all our learnings and we can pass it on to the next Hack and Learn event. We want to write this blog and then present it at our next Indigo peer learning session, which will be on the 17th of November of this year. Everybody is welcome to contribute and to be a co-author in this blog. So please, you can get in touch with me later. For this Hack and Learn event, we have 4 great challenges. All of them are very, very exciting. The first one is about the Impropon dataset spreadsheet. It is more or less about a review of the spreadsheet of our Impropon dataset. The spreadsheet together with the data dictionary are 2 key parts of our Indigo initiative. So that's why we wanted to review them and to see what we could update. We also have another team working on education outcome-based projects. That's the team that Sri was leading on. We also have another team who was developing a data dashboard for the outcome-based contracts dataset, and this is the INSPIR team who have been working with Google Analytics and Tableau and other systems to create the best dashboard that is possible. And then we also have a team that was working on the development of a digital platform to accelerate the stages of development and design of the social impact bond. That is going to be the 4th team that we hear about. How did we do it? We just had lots of time on Slack. As you can see, our Slack channels are filled with conversations, discussions, and sometimes even debates and data visualizations, and people trying things and people building prototypes and saying, no, we can do better. This is how we do it. I just want to say that our Slack channels are going to be open for the people who want to keep working with their teams, or for the people who want to engage with us, or the people who have questions or want to keep working with this in the future. This is all on my side. I will have some more reminders after the session, but it's back to you, Mara.
Thank you, Juliana. Don't go too far, because I'm coming to you almost immediately with our first challenge, which is the Impropon dataset spreadsheet challenge. So there has been some improvement that the team tried to design, and Juliana will present this to us right now, followed by some feedback. And Carolina, it would be great if you can be the respondent on this particular challenge.
Great, Mara. I think this was for Milena's, but it could be both of them if you want. Our challenge was to do a review of our impact bond dataset spreadsheet. As you know, the impact bond dataset spreadsheet and the data dictionary are the underpinning parts of our impact bond dataset. That's why this is so important to us. Our impact bond dataset spreadsheet is really long, has lots of tabs. It aims to get lots of data on impact bond projects. It would be very difficult for us to do that in 2 weeks. So what we did is to focus on some specific tabs. We've decided that we wanted to focus on outcome metrics and the results of social impact bonds, and we really wanted to better understand what is the cost of social impact bonds and what's the result of running a social impact bond. So that's why we decided to focus on this particular tab. But then reviewing the rest of the tabs of our spreadsheet, we realized that there is something key that was missing, and it was a tab or some set of variables about cost. So we decided that maybe we wanted to spend some time designing those variables. So our work was in 2 parts. The first part was reviewing the outcome metrics tab, and to do that, we worked with a real case. This time, we decided to work with the entrenched rough sleeping sieve in Manchester. As you can see, there is a map, and you can see it's a project that raised more than $2 million US, and it was aiming to generate improvements in the life of more than 300 homeless people. We didn't have any performance data on this sieve, but someone in the group very kindly shared this data, and we completed the spreadsheet for this sieve, and this is what a complete spreadsheet looks like. It looks very nice. Now you can see meaningful data for the different outcome metrics, but we decided, or we thought that there were some things that we could still improve. We realized that in our spreadsheet, there is not a standardized or a uniform way of reporting caps. These projects usually have caps. There could be a cap to the size of the contract. There could be a cap to the outcome payment in particular. There was no uniform way to report that. You can always add it in the notes column, but that's not uniform. It's not easy to do some analysis later. So we really think this is something that we can improve. The problem with not having the caps is that total outcome achievement sometimes is different from total outcome payment. You really need to understand where the caps are to see how much money each party, or how much, what's the flow of the funds. And then we usually ask for target population at the outcome level, and we thought that that might be not useful, because sometimes you just have the size of the cohort and you are not thinking of a particular number of people achieving a particular outcome metric. So there are some things that we could adjust, and this is something that we can definitely work on in the future. We really thought that the big missing part here were the cost variables. So we developed a series of research questions that we wanted to address. Basically, we wanted to know how much SIVs are costing, and how much is the cost not only of the SIV or the delivery of the intervention, but also the design features, the pilots, the digital pilots, all the work that goes before delivering a SIV, because that's also a cost that the different parties need to address. We also want to know if there are other initiatives designed to work with a similar cohort, if there is a possibility of comparing them to see which one is more expensive than the other one, and which one is producing more outcomes than the other one. As you can see, I really want to emphasize that this is work in progress. As you can see, we have lots of comments, people discussing with the rest of the team, what's the best variable, what's the best name, what is feasible, what is not. As this is work in progress, this is what we have so far. We realized that cost could look very different for outcome payers or for investors or fund managers. It could be very different depending on the stakeholder that you're speaking with. So the solution here would be to have two different tabs, one for the supply side, one for the demand side. Even if these tabs will look similar, it would be good to have both of them complete and then compare them. I'm not going to go one by one in the disaggregation of the variables. I'm just going to say that we identify three big moments where we want to collect data. The moment of development and design, the moment of contract setup and negotiation, and the moment where you are delivering the service and you have operational and management costs. And you have a very similar spreadsheet for the supplier side. We only added the SPV, setup and operational cost. And this is very important. We added the delivery innovation cost, because there's also a cost to adapt and iterate and rethink how you want to provide the service. And like this culture of continuous improvement, it's a great idea, but it also costs money. So this is something that we should be measuring too. And then we did this exercise, which is to match our ideal set of variables against the data that we know that practitioners or stakeholders could provide. And as you see, we think that we can get most of this data, but not as granular as we wanted. So we disaggregated market engagement, and that's something that it's a very nice to have, but we really don't think that we will get it from the stakeholders. We also disaggregated the procurement costs. Maybe they know how much procurement is costing, but they don't know how, they don't disaggregate that number. They don't know how little things are costing related to procurement. So we came with the following. We decided that these are our learnings or findings from the challenge. Some of our variables, as you can see, were ambitious. So it may be better to create broader categories, and then when stakeholders have granular data, we can add it in the notes part, or maybe it's better to have something broader so everybody can share some data and we can compare. There are two things that are difficult to measure, which are the cost of renegotiating the terms of the contract when this happens, and the cost of continuous improvements, the iterations, the adaptations of the service. Not because they are not measuring them, but because they may be hidden under the management cost or other type of cost. So it's very difficult to disaggregate these numbers. And the final one is, what about development impact bonds? We don't know if this would be a good structure to understand the cost of TIFs, because our group was all about UK practitioners. So we think we have a very good measure of what SIVs in the UK could cost. but we would really like to know if tips use the similar structure, or maybe there is something different there that we should develop. And yeah, that's all on my side, Mara.
Thank you, Juliana. Milena, indeed, I'll pass this to you for comments.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and it's a good challenge because it is definitely something that we don't have a lot of data on, and it's one of these, eternal questions that people are talking about, the high transaction cost, but actually how much does it cost is very rarely backed with evidence. So I think it's a really, really interesting question, and something that would be good to start compiling data and documenting. I think I have kind of two thoughts on this. I think that the first one is on the particular categories that you came up with, and the attempt, I guess, to think about the cost of designing and managing and contracting and managing the impact bonds. I from my experience, I think actually all of these look broadly, I mean, I would have to go into the very specific details, but I think it looks very much applicable to development impact bonds and to programs internationally. I don't see necessarily a lot of differences between social and development impact bonds in the way that costs would have to be categorized. What I think is probably the challenge is how do you get to standardization on the way costs are reported and calculated? And I know at GoLab you spend a lot of time thinking about the definitions on the Indigo database, right? So surely this is not news to you, but I assume when you get into costing, it might vary really a lot, because, for example, when you're talking about the design stages, do you take into account, probably you'll take into account kind of technical assistance, if there was, some technical assistance that was provided on these, but do you also take into account the cost of the government representatives and the donors that they have involved in this, and how do you cost that? So there are a lot of things like that. For example, legal costs, some of them will be provided pro bono. So will you cost them at what they would have costed, or would you consider that legal cost could be zero? So I think it would be extremely useful to get to that level of data, but probably the challenge in practice is going to be about how do you make sure that the data you're collecting is comparable, and that you don't end up with having some impact bonds where costs are reported in a way that is probably much lower than what the real cost would be. Especially because maybe I'm too cynical, but I think all of us trying to, in this space, trying to advocate for the greater use of these instruments sometimes do not want to really face the kind of big transaction cost question, right? And the other side of that is that also, on the other hand, we're not calculating very accurately either the cost of programs that are not done as impact bonds. So how does that compare, right? I often get into debates with people that, but impact bonds are so long to design. And then, well, yeah, but a World Bank program takes about 2 to 3 years to also get designed before it, so it's not, so I guess what is the counterfactual, I guess, there? So that, yeah, I guess on that specific, and I see you're asking, if we keep timesheet. Yeah, roughly, but not. We don't have like an extremely detailed accounting for that. But yeah, we have a bit of an idea of that. But I think that's a big question. That different organizations will do it in different ways. And the second point I wanted to raise is around the cost of delivery of the actual outcomes, because of course we shouldn't be too concerned about the cost of the delivery itself if we're paying for outcomes. However, very often we don't know exactly how much. How we should, at least in low data environments, we're setting the cost per outcome on the basis of the data that we have, which might not be perfect. And so it might be interesting to think about how we have under or overestimated these costs to inform the future price per outcomes that we'll be setting for future iterations of program. And again, if you want to do that, then you need to have very good data from all the providers and investors on the costs that they have incurred in the intervention. So this is something that in our programs in Sierra Leone and Ghana, we have done, we're trying to do. So we've set up budget templates that are quite disaggregated with standardized categories, so that we're collecting data on costs that are incurred for each component of the intervention that we can therefore afterwards compare. And I think that will be really interesting. But again, it takes a lot of work to standardize and ensure that the data is useful and comparable. And hopefully, I think that's a helpful conversation to have alongside the cost of designing the SIB, because if you're only focusing on the cost of designing the SIB, and managing it, you're very likely to find out that it's a very high cost. But actually, that high cost might be justified if, on the other hand, you get to a lower cost per outcome over time, compared to the alternative, which might have been like a grant or a fee-for-service contract. So yeah, I think really interesting initiative. Would be keen to see if that ends up being added to the Indigo database. But yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of practical questions. So I'm not sure if any of that makes sense, if you've thought about that during the challenge.
Thank you so much, Milena. Juliana, I don't know if you have an immediate reaction to this before I move to Georgie, but I invite everybody to keep an eye on the chat. There is a agreement on the importance of also seeing the cost of grants, maybe in this type of country, just visible issue around standardizations that no matter how much you try, people will categorize these cost elements slightly differently. So we need really to think clearly, what do we mean? And then there are comments from Nigel mentioning the importance of having a data community to create some of this alignment, given that is not so straightforward. So, but keep at. Juliana, do you have a quick comment before I pass to Georgie?
I have some comments, but I will put them in the chat so I don't eat up the time of someone else.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Juliana, and keep posting questions, and there will be a Q&A, an open Q&A at the end if we manage to have the time. So, Georgie, we're coming to you for Challenge 25. I know it was a big team and is a joint act, your presentation, but I'll pass the microphone to you to tell us who will speak to what aspect of your challenge. Georgie.
Thank you very much, Mara. Here it's many of the participants collaborate in this challenge, so some of them will present with me, so it will be great. Challenge 25 was about outcome-based contracting. So just to recap, the main idea of this kind of contracting is that in general, traditional forms of contracting, public services generally pay for inputs or activities, but in general, what people want to see is real change in outcomes and social outcomes. So outcome-based contracting is a way to link payments to these results. So next, please. So what we do in this challenge, the main idea is that we have an outcome-based contracts database, but we do not have some nice visualization. So the participants should try to understand what we do have in this database and what could be added to this database, and try to think about creative ways to present the information that we have in that. So next, please. So we had some guidelines in form of questions that could be good ways to think about the information that we could provide with the database and show it in the dashboard. For instance, which countries are the most engaged with OBC, when the contract was announced, stage of the development of the contracts, which are the most common SDGs related to these contracts. So for instance, and here we present part of the results. So now the group will talk about the results. So Erica.
Thank you, Georgie. Hi there. So I was involved in this Hack and Learn challenge, and one of the first questions that we've tackled is which countries are most engaged with OBCs? So to answer this question, I used the number of contracts within a country as a basic proxy for how many agencies are working in this way. So that's what you can see in this visualization on the screen. So you can see that the United States, the United Kingdom, and France have the highest total number of OBCs. The UK in particular has the highest number of concluded OBCs, indicating that they have been leading the way in using this model of financing. The United States have the highest number currently in the design state. So it'll be interesting to see in the future whether they will keep this momentum up, or if the other countries listed here will increase their level of OBC design activities. However, thanks to Mara's guidance, she did point out that this proxy does not take into account the size of the contracts or even the size of the country, for example, in terms of its public spending or the size of the country's economy. Next slide, please.
Just bringing a complementary view, Erica said. For instance, in this slide, we can see that the total investment by country is not matching where the country matching the countries that have more OBC contracts. For instance, we have India and Congo and Pakistan leading the total investment by country. So next, please.
In this visualization, it was a simple representation of when were these contracts announced. And you can see by a very great margin that most of them were announced in 2017. You can see in the middle of the visualization that there is a missing variable. So, well, not missing variable, but some contracts don't have the year of their announcement listed. So that's something to note, that it's really important that the data sets that we do work with do actually note basic elements for these visualizations, because it's not quite clear why some of the contracts aren't announced. Next slide, please. And so the next question to be tackled was the average duration of a contract. Again, we can see that by a great margin, we actually don't know what the contract duration is. But looking through the data, the reason for this is that a vast proportion of them are still at the design stage. So obviously we wouldn't know how long the contract has lasted if it has not yet been completed. If we were to exclude the contracts without the duration length data, we can see that 56 months is the most common contract length. And finally, another observation that can be made from this visualization is that these contracts are all beyond 2 financial years. So this means that any provider considering an outcome-based contract will typically have to be thinking medium to long term if this is something that they want to pursue. Next slide, thank you.
Hi everybody, are you listening to me? Okay, so in this graphic, we try to answer which sector of our database has the most contracts and where his sector is most located. Well, the first graphic actually don't say too much to us because he is an interactive graphic. It needs to be on the Data Studio platform for it to be useful for us. But I can say that the hidden circle represents the health sector. This is demonstrated by the graphic on the right, which shows the healthy target represents 25% of the contracts. And finally, the table below tells us that the contracts involving health are mostly located in the United States, which has 50 contracts in this area. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, and here we try to answer at what is the stage of the contract. In our database, we have 4 stages in which a contract can be. There is design, implementation, conclude, and discontinued. From the first graph, we can see that the vast majority, almost 45% of the contracts are in the implementation phase. In other words, we have 45% of the contracts are being applied to right now in the exact moment. And on the second graph, give us an idea of what stage each project is in by, the second graph gives an idea what stage the projects, each project was in by its targets. For example, healthy projects are the mostly in the implementation phase, is the blue one. or security, you have to see the implementation phase either. And the next slides, please.
Okay, so hello everyone, I am Fernando, and here I took 2 questions to analyze. And on this visualization, the objective was to analyze the SDG in the database. So the guiding question was, what is the most common SDG? Okay, so dividing this dashboard in the middle, on the left side on top, we have the absolute values of contracts per SDG. And on the bottom, we have the same information, but using relative numbers. Okay, so in this pie chart, basically we have the percentage for each SDG. And moving forward to the right side, we have, sorry, please, yeah, okay. So moving forward to the right side, we have a roadmap that can be filtered using the drop-down list. But once this is just a PowerPoint presentation, I cannot show this working for you, but doesn't matter. And below the map, we also have a timeline for each SDG. So concluding this visualization, if we want to get a general idea, looking at the left side, we can say that basically the most common SDG is good health. But if we want to analyze this in details, the conclusion depends on the country and the period to be analyzed. So next slide, please. So on this visualization, the guiding question was about investments. So basically, where are the investments coming from? And so we want to analyze the different kinds of outcome payers. So we have also a drop-down list to filter the map. And below the map, we have two pie charts. Basically, if you look at this pie chart, you can extract interesting insight. For example, note that even with a fewer number of contracts, non-profit institutions have a more significant accumulated investment when compared to multilateral institutions. So that's it.
Since it's still a work in progress, we also have some next steps. The first one is that we also have more interesting questions that we could answer with this database. So that's one point. We have just some guideline questions, but we also could have more questions to be answered. Another additional point is that one interesting topic is that we could merge this database with other information. So we could collect data from population or GDP by country and merge this database and provide a better visualization of the data, including other kind of database in our dashboard. So I think that's it. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgie. I'll come to you, Carolina, for some comments, your highlights, and feel free also to use the chat if you have additional comments. I just want to make sure we have another 2 challenges coming through. So Carolina,
okay. I'll be quick. So congratulations for the work. I really enjoyed it. I think it's super important for us to learn how we can advance in sustainable development using outcome-based contracts. Throughout the presentation, I was thinking about questions such as why some countries invest more money in each project as opposed to other countries that invest in more projects but less money in each project. What are the commonalities between the big countries that invest in OBCs, such as the US and the UK? Why are these countries leading the way? Other things that I thought, maybe, why is health such a big theme when it comes to OBCs? Is it that health outcomes are easier to track? Is it that OBCs are more likely to solve health problems? If so, then we could learn which are the specific sectors where OBCs can actually contribute in a more efficient way to overcome sustainable development challenges. What else did I thought? Most contracts are not too long, but not too short. They say they're in the middle. Why is that? Is that like an optimal timing for OBCs to be implemented? Otherwise they get, I don't know, they get old and people cannot make it sufficiently efficient. So all these questions came about just by looking at your dashboard. So it means that your dashboard is pretty good, pretty interesting to inform policy. And I think there is a lot to do going from it. So I'm very pleased to say congratulations.
Thank you so much, Carolina. I really like your pointing out how these visualizations are like can openers and help us pose like a precise question. Other comments, please feel free to use the chat, everyone. And we come now to our third challenge for today, which is challenge 26. It was led by Jri, but I believe it's Andrea and Ulrika that are presenting the challenge to us now.
Oh, hello, everyone. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So my name is Andrea Lowe. It's great to be here with you. I'm excited to be presenting this challenge alongside Ulrika. This is my first Hack and Learn, and I worked on challenge 26, which is the outcomes-based approaches to education, getting the evidence to policymakers. Next slide. So we started out with putting together a slide of like, what was our challenge? And it was based on the larger systematic review that was conducted by the Government Outcomes Lab before our challenge started, had 11,000 results, got down to about 300 studies, and then there were 43 specifically on education. And our challenge was, how can we make the information that's in these studies useful and accessible to policymakers and practitioners? Next slide. So we started out by having a discussion among our group. We met virtually last week and had a lot of great ideas. And we kind of came to two different really buckets of work. One is to further categorize the studies into different pockets that could be helpful for this group of policymakers and practitioners. And then the second was to identify these evidence gaps that could shape future research. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the further categorization and then flip it over to Ulrika, who'll talk a little bit about the evidence gaps. Okay, next slide. Okay, so given the constraints, the time constraints in our Hack and Learn, we focused on 3 different areas of categorization. So the first 2 were within incentivized outcome measure. One was the type of outcome measure based on kind of the length of time. Was it short term, medium term, long term? And then second was the level of the outcome measure. Was it at the individual level, the system level? Was it in certain? I know for a couple of mine that I found it was a little bit of both. It kind of depended. And then the last was the target population based on the level of their education. And that's everything from early childhood education all the way to doctorates or equivalent degrees. Next slide. So this is just a look at the spreadsheet that we used, and it was really nicely done. So the spreadsheet, each line represented a different study that was in our inclusion criteria, and it included everything from like the authors' names to the links to the actual paper, to a little summary about that particular study. And then in that, we added the level of education for each study, the level of the outcome measure, which can kind of see, but is on the second part that says the short-term, medium-term, or long-term, and then the level of the outcome measure, whether it was individual, system, or other, or uncertain. Okay. Next slide. So from this, we also gained some different insights. One of the things that I know I definitely came across was specifically around the outcome measures and the length of time. Sometimes it wasn't too clear what short-term versus medium-term versus long-term meant. There were some studies said, oh, this is a long-term study with long-term outcomes, and we're very specific about it, so it was easy to put that in. Other studies mentioned, okay, this is like over 1 year, this is over 3 years, and we didn't have like a very specific definition around the difference between short-term and medium-term versus long-term. We did have a really formal definition around education, so it made it easy to put those in there. But one of the things that we recommended is kind of using a formal framework and creating a formal framework of what that short to medium to long term meant, just to provide some additional guidance to people as they look up the different studies. We also talked about other categorizations, and this was in our earlier conversation that could be of interest should this work move forward. The first couple kind of relate to being able to get more information on that study. One, on whether the information in the paper is open access or if it's behind a paywall, and perhaps a link to that particular open access article. And then additionally, the name and contact details of the corresponding author, which if it is behind a paywall, you could reach out to that author, find a little bit more information, even perhaps get access to the article. One of the other things we talked about was including information on the degree of the service user, the beneficiary's involvement in this work or in the research. I know in my work here in the United States, there's a lot of focus on the community and making sure they're involved in everything from the planning of a program all the way through its implementation, and being able to include how that was done, or if that was done in a study, would be great when you're looking up those particular studies. The next two relate to really those piquing someone's interest around a particular article or study. The first is having a headline that just kind of overall describes that study up front, bolded, a way that you can easily see, oh, okay, this is the key takeaway, and I can learn a little bit more later. And then the second is including the corresponding Indigo ID, so that there's another place for that person to like link, get more additional details to that particular project, and be able to dig in a little bit further. And then last, we talked about grouping the outcomes into clusters, such as by attendance, by attainment, whether that study worked just with the individual or the wider family, or those outcomes also impacted the entire group. And now I'll actually flip it over to Ulrika to talk a little bit more about the second part in our study.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Hi there. So this is the second part of the Hack Team 26's challenge. So what we looked at is how can we represent this data in visualizations? And typically data visualizations show data that is present, but one different angle that we looked at is seeing if we could visualize what is missing. In other words, missing data as data in itself. And this can inform the evidence gaps to shape future research, which is something that would be important from a practitioner's point of view. So we looked at different variables across the whole data set. We've categorized them into 4 different themes, which are shown in the slide. So we have changes / variations, costs and resources, ecosystem and system strengthening effects, and also the scalability and sustainability of stocks. Next slide, please. So before I talk about this slide, I'm just going to quickly share the live visualizations on the chat so you can see them a bit more interactively. So I'd like to thank James for actually coming up with these really interesting visualizations. But just to explain the colors, so the blue is what we call present. So any variable where the reports of it are actually present in a particular research paper. The red that you can see is anything that's absent from a particular research paper, which means there's nothing in the report. And the missing / blank coded in yellow, and that means that no coding was done for that specific SOC in the paper. And so this is the theme of changes and variations. So the specific variables that we looked at for this specific theme include variables that report changes in the service delivery that were intervention specific, variables that record changes in person level outcomes, anything on unintended effects, also auxiliary resource or parallel reforms occurring alongside the social contract, anything that reports on the acceptability of the SOC, including political and cultural effects, and finally, anything that reports on the implications for management information systems. You can see from this visualization that there is a lot of red, and this is going to be a common theme that you can see in the next coming up slides. Thank you. Again, this one talks about the cost and resources. So specifically about the implications, particularly on transaction costs. Once again, a similar pattern occurs about the absent versus the present. Next slide, please. Again, for the third theme, this concerns implications beyond the SOC parties, including the highest percentage of the ecosystem and system strengthening effect. Again, a lot of it is absent. And if we go to the final theme, once again, the patterns are very stark to see, and this shows the importance of data visualizations. There is a lot of absent, missing data on variables that concern the scale and scalability of the SOC approach, as well as reports on the long-term sustainment, or what we could say as the post-SOC legacy effects. Next slide, please. And so just to sum up this aspect of the challenge, particularly from a practitioner's perspective, so you can see that from these visualizations, it's very apparent to see that there is a higher percentage of absent, missing data from the 4 themes selected to be analyzed. This is going to be really important for further research as well. And when it comes to practitioners, they are quite busy. As such, they're working on the front line, working on the ground. So they don't have time to aggregate all of the insights by reading all of these different research papers. So data visualizations like these, or the systematic review data, it allows really accessible insights for them to see exactly what is missing. Furthermore, where there are good outcomes to be reported, it also strengthens the quantitative case for OBCs in their respective sectors. And finally, these visualizations can be a useful tool for different sectors beyond education. So this is not just applicable to education, but also the range of OBCs that are occurring in different sectors as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea and Ulrika. Carolina, can I come to you for a 2-3 minutes quick fire before we go to our last challenge?
Sure. So thank you for the presentation. That's a great work again. It's super important to have analysis of that kind, evaluating the evidence per se to see what's working, what's not working, what needs to be done. I felt I was expecting to see something like which initiatives are the ones that work and which ones are the ones that do not work, what kinds of evidence we do not have on some types of initiatives, but you guys went through another path, much more creative than I would be. I really saw value in learning what's missing in those studies and the gaps that need to be that need to be addressed in future research. And yeah, I just learned a lot because in the beginning of the presentation, I thought that you would go through a completely different path. So I was surprised, and it opened my mind to what else can be done. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Carolina. This is going to be posted because there are all these area of future research. So let's write up grants to try to tackle some of these unanswered questions. And thank you so much for being brief. I'll pass over to our last presenter, is Anurag and Ishani. I think Ishani, you are presenting the challenge number 27 on the platform to accelerate SIG design.
Right. So I think, thanks, Mara. Anurag is here, so he'll be starting the presentation.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you, Shani. Hi, everyone. I'm Anurag from Impactverse, and I'll be sharing updates on our challenge along with Ishani. Before we start, I would like to thank the entire Go Labs team for giving us this opportunity. The last 2 weeks have been incredible. We learned a lot, and we are really excited to share our progress with all of you. Let's move ahead. Next slide, please. So Impactverse is a social enterprise based in India. We help small nonprofits improve their capability using technology. Through our experience, we have found that most nonprofits in India struggle to raise funds. They do not have access to commercial capital, and philanthropic and government funds are very limited. But most of these nonprofits are running great programs, and they are creating very strong local outcomes, which qualifies them for outcome-based financing, for example, with impact bonds. But as you all know, impact bonds are very expensive. They take a lot of time to structure and are super complex. So the challenge we decided to work on was how to make design of impact bonds simple and easy. And the big idea is to make impact bonds more accessible and a viable alternative to finance small nonprofits and social enterprises. So with this, let me hand it over to Ishani. Ishani will discuss how we went about this challenge. Over to you, Ishani.
Thanks a lot, Anurag. And it has been a great experience being part of Hack and Learn. So thanks to the Go Lab team. And with this, I'd like to walk you all through the steps we took to solve for this challenge. So the first step was where the whole team studied and examined the impact bond lifecycle stages carefully, which are present on the Oxford Go Lab website. And in a short while, Anurag will be showcasing a small demo video to you all, where you all will be able to correlate as to how we have used these life cycle stages as foundation to build the product. Second, the team was, in the second step, the team was divided into 6 subgroups, and each subgroup was allotted a particular stage. And the eventual outcome was that each subgroup presented us with meaningful frameworks, templates, and tools, and would like to talk a bit about the frameworks and the tools that were shared with us. So one framework was built with the idea of helping the stakeholders define the problem, figure out whether impact bond is the right way to go about. The second framework was about setting the outcomes and pricing them, along with a financial model, and which was followed by a framework which explained as to how stakeholders can together come, assess, evaluate, and form consensus on a particular project they want to fund. And eventually, the last subgroup presented us with a few sample contracts, which were stakeholder specific, and they were really helpful. So all in all these frameworks, tools helped us design a simple workflow, which Anurag will be showcasing to you all. Before that, I would like to say that we have these tools and templates. We have shared them with the Go Lab team, and if anybody wants to refer to them or give us feedback on them, we're happy to share as well here as well. So with that, over to you, Anurag, and yes, all of you be ready for the design workflow.
So Ishani, I think you might need to share your screen for the video.
Perfect.
Or, yeah.
I'll do that. Is my screen visible?
Yes. Okay, so before we start the video, so just to set, okay, you started the video. Okay.
1 second, I'll just pause it. Yeah.
Okay, so just two minor things to set the context. First is that the scope of the prototype is limited to simplifying impact-bound design. So what you will see is a very high-level step-by-step workflow with dedicated modules for each step. And the second thing is that the platform is intended to be used by outcome funders, commissioners, intermediaries, researchers, and even technical assistance providers who wish to design and structure impact bonds. And the design philosophy has been such that we want to standardize things to the extent possible. And beyond that, we want to integrate the flexibility to adapt it as per sector, as per region, and as per specific needs. So with that said, I think we can start the video, Shannon. So we can imagine that we are structuring this platform, and here we have broken the entire design process into certain stages. We have a live update on those stages. These are the workflows. Now each stage is broken down into specific modules, and these modules can again be filled and we've tried to be as exhaustive as we could. And moving on to the team, I think we'll see it in a while. So we can add team members, or we can invite other stakeholders also who want to be part of this design process. And this is a basic setting where we can decide whether this transaction is public or private. So that's about it. Can we go to the slides?
Yes.
Thank you. I think we are coming up to time. Milena, can you give us, you are involved in many designs of impact bonds. How do you find this tool? Can you give us some constructive feedback?
Sure. No, thank you so much, and well done to the team for the work. I think it's a really good idea to try to simplify and standardize what that process looks like. Like we often have to explain it to a variety of stakeholders. So having a tool that shows visually here is everything that's included and the sequencing of it would be great. I would be very curious to look in more details at how the workflows work, and and if you've got something a bit visual on the timing of each element, and also on what fits into what. So there is an element of some of these things. For example, you need to define metrics first before you can talk about verification, before you can build a financial model. So there is a bit of like sequencing that's important. And one very small element that I haven't seen is everything around the kind of contracting and procurement. And these considerations, in my experience, are actually really critical and very often underestimated in how important they are and how much they need to be anticipated. So not having them at the very end of the process, but starting to build the basis for it from the beginning. But yeah, sounds really interesting.
Thank you,
Milena.
Please feel free to add. We are soon having a social. We'll stay on this line for those who can, but many might want to leave at the top of the hour. So I'll pass to Juliana. Juliana, we have a couple of next steps that we want to invite people to, and then the real next step on the social. Juliana, can you tell us what's happening now?
Yes, let me share some slides that I have for our next steps. As I was saying before, I wanted to remind you, because I need my slide. I just wanted to remind you that our Slack channels will remain open for those who want to keep working or keep in touch with the team. And now we can write a blog about our lessons and learnings. So if you're interested in co-authoring the blog, please let me know. I will be on leave next week, but I will make sure to answer your email the following week. But I would really like to know who is up for this task. And then please come to our social event. It's in the same link. Sri already sent some instructions, so everybody should bring something indigo. If you don't have anything indigo, don't worry, you can come anyways. But some people will be wearing indigo. And the next Indigo peer learning session will be on the 17th of November. We would really like to see you there too, because our idea is to present the blog in that session. And that's all on my side, Mara. Back to you.
Thank you so much. So the only thing I have to say is thank you everyone for participating in this Hack and Learn, and special thanks to our co-host at INSPIR, the challenge leader, who have really proposed something that is helpful and carried through in 2 weeks. Thank you to Carolina and Milena for their feedback, and to James and Nilima that behind the scenes have helped us creating this visualization and thinking what is possible live. So thank you so much. And for those of you who can stay for the social, where we will hand out a prize, maybe, is on this link. But if you need to leave us now, I hope to see you on the 17th of November. Thank you.
Thank you.